So, the funny thing about judgments, I was having this conversation a while back with one of my cousins, and she started talking about how she used to judge me as a person for being too Western and too whitewashed and overall not Chinese enough, which is really funny. Now, my ethnicity is Chinese, so my genetic makeup gives me the physical features of someone who looks like this, someone who looks like a Chinese person, but I'm fourth generation born and raised somewhere else. Anyway, as my cousin was telling me all of this, I was suddenly just deeply struck by how unaffected my life has been by all of these judgments of hers, these narratives and stories and opinions that she and her mum would have about me that was so harsh, and they just thought so little of me because they thought I wasn't in touch with my Chinese roots, that I was essentially someone who was really spoiled. I was a brat who had all the money in the world and all of these other privileges that they perceived themselves not to have. So it sure seems like these judgments have really impacted her life quite a bit, considering how often she would bring them up in conversation. And while these judgments have been brewing away and shaping her life and her childhood and becoming part of her teenage years, I, for the most part, have been completely unaffected. In fact, throughout most of my life, I hardly thought about what this person thought for me. I was working on myself, I was working on my goals, I was working through my issues, and I was just trying to live the best life I could. The other thing that struck me about these judgments were how wildly bizarre they were. All this talk about money and privilege and being whitewashed, really crazy narratives about how I was so rich I could afford to throw my iPhone 4 at a wall just because I wanted to. I found it really fascinating and really funny because those ideas in her head were so vastly different from my actual reality and my experience of my life. It also felt really hypocritical because these judgments about finances, my interpersonal relationships, what I was like as a person, a lot of those elements were also present in their lives. So I just thought it was really strange that they would be judging me for things that they do themselves too. My point to all of this is that these judgments not only didn't really affect much of my life, they were also wildly inaccurate, and most importantly, they really lacked context. They were essentially assumptions born out of gossip that my cousin had heard throughout her childhood, and she formed her own stories in her head based on her perspective, which is based on her experiences. And quite frankly, it made me think about all the times that I've been judgmental towards other people. On social media, for example, I can be quite presumptuous towards others. I would see a post on Instagram of someone living their best life on a yacht and think to myself, oh, if I had a 7-digit trust fund, I would be able to live my best life too. Or I would see a friend post something that has got a real SJW vibe to it and think to myself, wow, this person seems to really enjoy posting about social causes, but they don't actually do anything in real life to effect any tangible change. And the only thing that these judgments and assumptions do is affect me. They affect my mood, they affect my relationships with these people, and it affects my relationship to myself as well. While I'm busy embodying this really strange mix of bitterness and superiority, the person with the 7-digit trust fund is out there living their best life, completely unaware and unaffected by all these judgments that I have of them. The other interesting thing that I noticed is how multiple people can look at the same thing but see completely different things. For example, take that classic story of a homeless person sleeping on the street. One person could walk by, look at them and say, wow, this person must have had really bad luck in their life to end up living on the streets. Another person could walk by and say, I can't believe they're sleeping rough in this part of town. It's such a difficult thing to do. Someone else could walk by and see this homeless person sleeping on the streets and think to themselves, Must be drugs. So coming back to what my cousin says about me being too whitewashed, I'm often judged by that side of the family for not being Chinese enough, for not being too Western, whatever that means. But then conversely, I also have friends who really appreciate that I have a more balanced outlook on life, and they really like the fact that I'm not super Chinese in a traditional way. And then, interestingly enough, my partner sometimes tells me that I'm too Chinese and that I'm too direct in my communication and I'm not polite or refined enough the way English people are. So who's right and who's wrong? Well, I guess they all are, because they're not seeing me as I am, they're seeing me as they are. They're seeing me through the lens of their perception and their experiences, and therefore their judgments of me are going to differ based on who they are at any given time. So, to wrap it all up, number one, your unspoken judgments are more likely to affect you than the person being judged. Number two, your judgments are probably inaccurate or missing some vital context. And number three, your judgments really say more about you as a person than it does about the subject or the object of your judgments. At the end of the day, we are all human beings. We all make judgments and assumptions. Those are absolutely important components in our evolution. It helps us maneuver and navigate through this complex social world. So I'm not advocating for stopping the judging train, because I think that's impossible. I don't see how that can be realistic. But it's worth taking a look at the kinds of reflex judgments that we make about other people, the kind that we don't even notice. Practice some awareness and notice that when you observe yourself making a snap judgment about someone else, ask yourself, what does this say about me? When you find yourself making an assumption about someone else, just be curious and ask yourself, where is this coming from and what can I learn about myself from it? That is pretty much all I have for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any thoughts or you would like to share your experiences, please do so down in the comments below, because I would love to hear from you. I'm actually thinking of making a video about the woes of being judged all through my childhood and most of my adult life for being too whitewashed and too Western, whatever that means, and not Chinese enough. But I think that would potentially be too personal and very, very ranty. So maybe not.